Well, let's circling back to our top story. 3 more F1 races have been cancelled for the season. Singapore, Japan and Azerbaijan are out due to the coronavirus pandemic. So that means a total of 7 Grand Prix have been called off. Antonio Fatas, a professor of economics at INSEAD in Singapore, joins us now again. Professor, another blow to the F1 calendar. Can you put a number on the losses this will incur?
Yeah, the company that runs Formula One internationally, Liberty Media, it has probably revenues of about $2 billion US dollars every year. And that amounts probably about $100 million per race. So every race that gets cancelled is probably a loss of about 100 million for them. Although the number might be different because depending on how they have negotiated some of the fees they collect from the TV, etc., they might be able to recoup some of this amount. Of course, you also have the races that might be happening without spectators, and they might get lower revenues from those races as well. So obviously, it's a big shock for this company, and the question is whether they will be able to survive with a calendar which only has 8 races at this point, even if they're hoping for 15.
And if we're talking about Singapore and the night race here, what are the knock-on effects for that? They're quite far-reaching, aren't they?
There was an estimate a few years ago that Singapore revenues directly from the race, coming from the tourism that come to the race, the hotels, the restaurants, etc., were about 150 millions of Sing dollars per year. So clearly that's a loss for Singapore. Now, compared to everything that is going on at the same time, obviously tourism is not coming to Singapore because we are in a situation of lockdown because of COVID-19. So it's not a big number compared to everything else that surrounds us, but it's not a small number either. And we know that Formula One was a unique event that was helping sort of like bring the image of Singapore further up to the rest of the world, and probably was bringing a lot of other revenues as a result of it.
So, Professor, help us understand, what's the F1 business model? How much will organisers have to bear versus the government of the hosting race?
So the standard model is the Formula One company will take all the revenues from television, will take revenues from sponsorships, will collect a fee from the government or the local organizers, and the local organizers will typically get the revenues from the ticket sales. Now, in the case of Singapore, it was very, very likely that even if the race were to happen, there would be no spectators. So there is not a big loss of revenues for Singapore in that respect, because even if we had had a race, probably would have been without spectators. Now, the big question is the fee that typically is paid from the local organizers or government to the Formula One company. There's a question of what happens in a cancellation. My assumption is the fee does not get paid, but I'm not a lawyer and I'm not sure how those contracts are written.
And one last question for you. When do you see F1, the industry, bouncing back?
I think it will depend, like everything else in the economy, will depend on what happens in the fall, whether we sort of have defeated the virus and we don't have second waves, and then you might have a 15-race season, which is shorter than a regular season, but it would be a nice step towards next year where we can come back to a regular season. But if we end up with a season which is much shorter, Formula One was already a little bit in a decline. I think there were fewer spectators, fewer TV watchers. So this could be a big shock to them, and it could be that it puts them on a trend that might keep them on a sort of low spectator horizon for several years.
Okay, many thanks for your thoughts this evening, Professor Antonio Fatas from INSEAD Singapore.